Imagine being born a prince or a princess of one of Europe's greatest dynasties, and by the time you're old enough to remember anything, the empire is gone. In 1916, Karl I became the last emperor of Austria and king of Hungary. Together with his wife Zita of Bourbon-Parma, he had 8 children, heirs to palaces in Vienna, Budapest, Prague, and beyond. But after the downfall of 1918, those children didn't grow up in glittering courts. They grew up in boarding houses, borrowed estates, and cramped rooms in exile, moving from country to country with a widowed mother, a forbidden name, and a past that much of Europe wanted to forget. In this video, we're going to follow those 8 children. What did life look like for them after 1918? We start with the eldest, Otto. He was born on November 20th, 1912, as Archduke Otto of Austria. At the time, his great-granduncle, Emperor Franz Joseph, still sat on the throne. When his father became emperor the day after Otto's 4th birthday, Otto was elevated to crown prince. After the end of the First World War, Otto's father never formally abdicated, but the family was nonetheless forced into exile. When his father died in 1922, Otto became the Habsburg pretender to the throne. He went on to earn a doctorate in political and social sciences. Although he was barred from returning to Austria unless he renounced his dynastic claims and accepted the status of a private citizen, he remained personally popular among many Austrians. That's one of the ironies of his life, officially unwelcome but privately admired. As Nazi Germany grew in power, Otto offered to take over the Austrian government in an effort to block the Anschluss. Despite these efforts, Austria was annexed in 1938, and the Nazis sentenced Otto to death if he was ever captured. Even under this threat, he helped around 15,000 people escape the country. In the early years of the Second World War, Otto and his mother lived in Portugal. Under pressure from Nazi Germany, the Portuguese authorities eventually asked them to leave, and they moved to Washington, D.C. After the war, Otto settled in France and Spain. In 1951, he married Princess Regina of Saxe-Meiningen, and together they had 7 children. In 1961, Otto formally declared his loyalty to the Republic of Austria. This step triggered a political crisis in the country, later known as the Habsburg Crisis. Only several years after his renunciation did he finally receive an Austrian passport, and in 1966, after 48 years in exile, he was able to visit his homeland again. Imagine stepping back into the country where you were once crown prince, not as a returning monarch, but as a citizen with a freshly issued passport. From the 1970s onward, Otto became increasingly active in politics. He was an early advocate of European integration and strongly supported bringing Hungary, Slovenia, and Croatia into the European Union. He also served for 20 years in the European Parliament as a member of the CSU, eventually becoming one of its senior figures. After the death of his wife in 2010, Otto withdrew from public life. He died the following year at the age of 98 and was buried in the imperial crypt in Vienna. Otto's younger sister Adelheid was born at Schloss Hetzendorf on January 3, 1914. During the First World War, she often accompanied her father on visits to inspect the troops. After the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, she, like the rest of her family, went into exile. In 1933, Adelheid became the first member of her immediate family to return to Vienna. She studied at the University of Louvain and later settled in the United States to escape the rise of the Nazi regime in Europe. Adelheid eventually returned to Europe and died in 1971 at the age of 57. Another of Karl and Zita's sons, Robert, was born on February 8, 1915. After Karl's ascension to the throne, his second son Robert was granted the title Archduke of Austria-Este. In 1953, Robert married Princess Margherita of Savoy-Aosta. The couple settled in Paris, where Robert worked in a bank, and they went on to have 5 children. So picture this, a Habsburg Archduke descended from emperors, commuting to a bank job in Paris like any other worker. Robert died in 1996, just one day before his 81st birthday. His widow Margherita passed away roughly 3 years ago. Next comes Archduke Felix, born on May 31st, 1916 at Schönbrunn Palace. At 21, he was permitted to return to Austria to attend the Theresian Military Academy where he began a career in the Austrian army. His military path was cut short by the rise of Nazi Germany, forcing him to first flee to Czechoslovakia and later to the United States. In 1952, Felix married Princess Anna Eugenie of Arenberg. They had 7 children, and Felix later worked as a businessman and marketing consultant. The family spent much of their time living in Mexico. An exiled Habsburg prince doing business in Mexico is probably not the version of after the empire his ancestors would have imagined. Felix never formally renounced his rights to the Austrian throne. Because of this, he was only allowed to enter Austria for his mother's funeral in 1989. In 1996, he illegally crossed the Austrian border and held a press conference, after which the government warned him that he would face prosecution if he did so again. He eventually reached a settlement with the Austrian authorities, declaring that he respected the Republic. Felix died in Mexico on September 6, 2011. The last surviving child of Karl I and Zita. His body was brought back to Europe and interred at Mori Abbey in Switzerland, where he shares his coffin with the urn containing his wife's heart. Karl Ludwig was born on March 10, 1918, arriving as the empire was already crumbling. He studied at the University of Louvain in Quebec while his family was living there in exile. During the Second World War, Karl Ludwig joined the U.S. Army and assisted President Franklin D. Roosevelt in secret negotiations with Hungary. After the war, he continued to work in the United States. So you have the son of the last Habsburg emperor now serving in an American uniform, helping Washington deal with Central Europe. History has a sense of irony. At 32, he married Princess Yolanda of Lynn, a Belgian princess, and they had 4 children. In 1958, the family returned to Europe, where Karl Ludwig worked for a company in Brussels until his retirement in 1986. In 1996, he received his Austrian passport and was officially allowed to return to his homeland. Karl Ludwig died on December 11, 2007, at the age of 89. His widow Yolanda lived to be 100 and passed away in 2023. Karl Ludwig is buried in the Imperial Crypt in Vienna next to his mother. Next is Archduke Rudolph, born on September 5, 1919 in Switzerland, the first of Karl's children to be born after the fall of the empire. Rudolph was educated in exile and went on to study at the university in Quebec. However, once his true identity became known, he was expelled. In 1953, he married Countess Ksenia Chernichev-Bezobrasov, and they had 4 children. In 1968, Rudolph and Ksenia were involved in a serious car accident. Ksenia was killed while Rudolph survived. Rudolph married again in 1971, this time to Princess Anna Gabriele von Wrede, with whom he had 1 daughter. Later in life, he worked as a bank director and on Wall Street. Again, not exactly the traditional Habsburg career path, from imperial palaces to the world of finance and skyscrapers. He died on May 15, 2010. His second wife is still alive today and is currently 85 years old. Archduchess Charlotte was born on March 1, 1921 in Switzerland. Like her older siblings, she was deeply affected by her parents' exile and spent her childhood moving between Europe, the United States, and eventually Canada. There, she graduated from Laval University with a degree in economics. After finishing her studies, Charlotte moved to the United States, where she worked as a welfare worker. In 1956, she married George, head of the House of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. He died only 7 years later, and the couple had no children. Charlotte herself died in 1989. Lastly, we have Elizabeth, born on May 31, 1922. 2 months after the death of her father. After her family eventually settled in Canada, she, like some of her siblings, studied at Laval University. In 1949, Elizabeth married Prince Heinrich Karl of Liechtenstein. They had 5 children together. Elizabeth died on January 6, 1993. So what became of the children of the last Habsburg emperor? They didn't restore the monarchy their father had lost. Instead, they slipped into a new Europe, sometimes in parliaments, sometimes in offices, and sometimes in completely ordinary jobs.